Okay, we'll start the session today. So last class we had seen the theoretical concepts related to Spring Boot, and we had covered everything like annotations, how Spring Boot works, and different terminologies in Spring Boot. So today we'll start with the development of our project, and we'll start building our real-time project, and we'll build it slowly. Like we'll build it component by component, and we will build REST APIs, and then we'll like improve on those REST APIs, like put certain validations, exception handling, and all. But we'll start with basics, and you guys can also like start along with me. You can or you can like, even if you want, you can try it out later, but just follow the steps, everything whatever I'm seeing, like just try to follow each step, such that means things become easy when you try to like implement. So we'll create a Spring Boot project, and the simplest way to create a Spring Boot project is Spring Boot starter. There's a Spring Boot starter project. So there's a Spring initializer. I'll ping you this link, start.spring.io. You can open this link, start.spring.io, and see, this will help you to create a basic project, and then you can start improving on that project. You can like start adding different things. So we are going to create a Spring Boot project, and let's give some name to our Spring Boot project. See, this Spring Initializer, this is a uh, website where you can go, and you can just click on Maven here, and you can select the important things here. See, we are building our project in Java, so we have selected this Java. One second. Yeah, so we have selected this Java, and our build tool will be Maven. There are different build tools. Uh, there's one Gradle, there's this Gradle Kotlin, and then there is this Maven. So we'll be using Maven as our dependency tool, dependency management tool, and build tool. We have already discussed this in theory. And let's select this Spring Boot version. So like Java has version, Maven has version, so Spring Boot also has a version. So we'll select this 3.2.2 version. So if anyone is trying out right now, you can select these options, like Java. Java is for our language. Maven is for our dependency management, and it will also be used as a build tool. And then we have this Spring Boot version. And now let's see, we will provide some group ID. So group ID is basically the name of our company, or whatever company you are working in. You can provide something like com dot something your with your company name. So I am just giving some company name like com dot my org for simplicity, and I'll give some project name. So we'll build a project on employee management. So I'm giving this project name here, and let me remove it from the package name here, and let me just give some description. Let me just give some description like employee management project. Now you can see that we have some options to select the packaging type. So there are two options available. Either we can like select the packaging as jar or war. and we have also got to select the Java version. So here it's like given 17 and 21, but we will modify it to Java 8. We'll see how we can do, but we'll select and generate this project as of now. So let's do one thing. uh, we have provided the group ID. So group ID is basically a unique name of your company. So let's keep it like com.myorg, and package name is com.myorg. So your folder structure, the package structure, base package structure will be created like com, and within com there is a sub package that is myorg, and your artifact id. Artifact id is basically a unique name of the project. So our project is called employee management, and our group is basically com.myorg. So it is basically a unique base name of our company. And we have selected the language, we have selected the build, whatever tool we want to like build it. We have selected it as Maven, and we have selected the Spring Boot version. We have selected the Java version as well, and we will add some dependencies, some basic dependency. So see, I've discussed that our dependencies would be available in the pom.xml, right? So we will select some basic dependency. So we are going to build a web application, so we can select this Spring Web Application. So let's see the description over here. Build web including RESTful applications using Spring MVC. Uses Apache Tomcat as the default embedded container. So this Spring Boot application, when we select the Spring Web, so it gives you the features of RESTful web services, and means you are able to create the REST APIs, and it also gives you the features of Spring MVC, and it embeds the Apache Tomcat as your server in your project. So you don't have to like manually go ahead and uh, add any Tomcat server in your application. So see, when I select this, there is some dependency which is already added. So let's try to go ahead and click on this generate. Anyone has any issues in understanding what I did until now? I've selected the language as Java. I've selected the build and dependency tool as Maven. I've selected the Spring Boot version. I provided group ID, and this group ID is basically your unique base name of your company. Artifact ID is some name of your project. So we are building a project on employee management. So I have given the name as employee management, and I've given some description, and the project, the entire modules, all the modules of the project will be packaged as a jar file, and our Java version I've selected it as 17, but we will modify it to Java 8 since we were developing with Java 8, and I've added the dependencies. So we are going to build a Spring Web application. Let's try to generate this. When you click on generate, one one of the folders, it will be downloaded something like this, employee management. So let's go ahead, copy it on our desktop. One zip file is downloaded as soon as you click on generate. And what you can do, you can like extract this folder. Once you extract this folder, once you extract this folder, you can copy this to your workspace. So you had already created a workspace. So what you can do, you can go in the workspace, you can create something like Spring Boot training, or some whatever suits you. So Spring Boot training, and in this batch h1, what I am trying to do, I will paste this project, means whatever we downloaded from the, whatever we generated from the Spring Initializer. Anyone has any queries until now? So
are you importing for
sorry,
Eclipse or
uh, sorry, can you please repeat your question?
after generated? What do you do? Sorry, I didn't see.
Yeah, after generated, when you click on that generate, right, it basically downloads in your, you go to your downloads folder. Once you click on generate, you can go to the downloads folder in your computer. In the downloads folder, you can see this, right? There's one zip file already generated, employee management.zip. So you can extract this folder. So once you extract this folder, right, it will give you some, it will give you uh, a folder, and that folder will contain basically your basic folder structure of your program, of your project. So this is the thing. I will import this and show it to you. So once you click on generate, you will get a zip folder in your downloads folder. You can copy that, you can extract that zip folder, and what you can do, you can copy that particular folder in your workspace. You can create something like Spring Boot training such that there's a separate workspace for that. I have created something like, in my workspace I have two projects like Java training, Spring Boot training. So Java training is already done. So in Spring Boot training, in this batch H1, I have pasted that folder, whatever we generated and whatever we extracted. So I will now import this project in our IntelliJ editor. So let's go to our IntelliJ editor. Everyone clear until now? If you have any questions, you can ask,
Okay.
or I will
Yeah,
proceed.
simply as for the extractor for
Yeah,
the
go
way
ahead.
right?
Yeah. Whatever zip folder was generated, right? I just extracted, and after extracting, I just copied that folder to my workspace. So in my workspace, I have one folder like Spring Boot training. In that Spring Boot training, I have created one folder as H1, batch H1, and I'm not understanding. Okay, Solomon, what is your question? Okay, did you miss the part where I had gone to the Spring Initializer? Did you join late? Okay, I'll repeat it once more. So,
Or
so kindly join on time such that you don't miss the important things. So see, this is the URL. I've just pinged one URL on the Zoom chat. You can go to that particular URL. This is Spring Initializer website. So you can uh, create your basic folder structure of your project from here. So see, what I have done is I went to this website, Spring Initializer website. I have selected language as Java since we are using Java for our development. I have selected this project as Maven project. See, there are lot of build tools, but we will be building our project with Maven. So we have already discussed this in theory. Like Maven is a dependency management and build tool as well. So we have selected Maven. So Spring Boot also has some version. So there are different versions available like 3.3.0, 3.2.3, but I have selected this 3.2.2. See, we can switch to versions, but I've selected this 3.2.2. Then we have some kind of project metadata. Metadata is kind of some kind of data related to our project. So is basically group is basically some kind of like unique name of your company. So I provided it as com.myorg, and I have also provided the same for our package name like com.myorg. So the folder structure that will be generated will be like com will be our parent folder, and within com there will be like subfolder like my.org. We will create further subfolders as well, but this is it for now. And then we have given a artifact name. Artifact is basically a unique name of your project. So I've given it as employee management, and then the name of the project is also employee management, and I have given some basic description like employee management project. Now we can add some basic dependencies. When you click on this add dependencies, you can go ahead and select this Spring Web. There was one option Spring Web which I have already selected. So Spring Web is basically like it will help you to build RESTful applications using Spring MVC, and it will also have your Tomcat server. So once you click on this add dependencies, there is this web option. If I remove this one right now, right, and again go to this option, there's this Spring Web. You can click on it. Once you click on it, there's this Spring Web dependency that is added. So now what you can do, you can go ahead and there is this generate button. You can click on this generate. Once you click on this generate, one zip folder will be one zip folder will be generated and it will come to your downloads folder. So there is something like employee management.zip. So you can extract this folder, and once you extract this folder, you can copy this to your workspace. So you can copy this to your workspace. I've created two different folders in my workspace, one for Java training where I had all the programs of Java training, and I have one Spring Boot training. So in the batch H1, I have copied this employee management. So is this fine or not? Are you clear or not as of now? Does anyone still have any questions?
Yeah, I just group. I mean, just you give you the company name or your project name. You have to have the same thing from your project.
A group name is basically a unique name of your company. Don't give your company name, means I'm just trying to demo it, since you can like give something like com dot something. Let's say your company name is ABC. You can give like com dot ABC. But I'm just doing it for like demonstration purpose. I cannot give a proper name of the company here, right? You understand those things. So
Okay. Do we have? I mean, have to there's the same group. I mean, the project group name and project we are related to. I just company name.
See, group name is like your company name, and this artifact ID is basically your project name. So,
Wow.
artifact ID is employee management. Group name is your some kind of like URL of your, means you can say a unique name of your company, like com, and this is like written in this convention. Like you start with com dot, and let's say your company name is ABC, just provide that ABC, means it will be, the folder structure will also be created such that.
Okay.
Okay, so let me now try to import this project that I have copied in my workspace. So I'll go to file, I'll go to open, and I'll go to documents, and I have my project in my workspace. I'll go to Spring Boot training, and I'll go to this batch H1, and I'll go to this employee management. I will click on open, and I'll click on trust project, and I will open it in a new window. So this will scan the project, and it will so it is scanning the project, and it will be basically importing certain dependencies. So once you import this project, right, you will be seeing this pom.xml here. Everyone please focus here. So you can open this pom.xml, and you can see the information that you have already provided, right? See, you had provided your group ID as com.my.org, and you had provided the artifact ID as artifact name as employee management. You can see this is reflecting in your pom.xml. Then this is the basic version that it has generated, and it is the name of your project, and the description is employee management project. And whatever you have selected, those things are basically reflecting here. Like properties, your Java version is selected as 17. I will change it to 1.8 since we are building with 1.8. And you have selected some dependencies as well, right? So whenever we want some dependency to be added to our project, we will add it in this section. You see this tag, right? Dependencies. And within dependencies, there are a lot of dependency. So this dependency was Spring Web dependency, and it comes from like Spring Web dependency we have added, right? So this gives you a Spring Boot starter web dependency. So this will be required for our project, and it comes from this org.spring framework. So this is a Spring related dependency. So we have some Maven repository website. So if I go ahead and try to like open, let's see, Spring Web dependency. If you click on this, right, you have some Maven repository. So here you can go and you will see a lot of versions here. So you need to select the compatible version. So we'll select some compatible version. Let's say I've gone and clicked here, and when I click here, right, so this is the exact thing which you are seeing in your pom.xml, right? So this dependency comes from this website. So actually Maven repository website, right, this has all the dependencies which are required for your project. So in case you require some dependency and you are not able to, you don't exactly know what dependency I need to like copy paste in like this group ID, artifact ID. So you can go, you can search something like this Spring Web dependency, go to this Maven repository website, and here what you can do, you can copy this dependency and then go to your editor, and within these dependencies you can add one of those dependencies. So you can get that Spring Boot starter web dependency. Now again, if you want to like add some dependency, what you can do, if you want to like add some dependency, add one new dependency here. See, this group ID and artifact ID are already generated for you. You can get this information from the MVN repository website. So whatever you need to add, let's say you want to add some JSON or some logger uh, uh, dependency, you can get it from that MVN repository. That is the place that will give you the information about the repositories that you need to import in your project. Is this clear for everyone? If you have any questions, because this is the starting point, you can like ask me now.
The dependencies to comparable for is the latest one of version. Will you compare?
Sorry, what?
I mean, you can. I mean, the print dependency.
No,
Which one compare? I mean, the
see,
latest one.
you, if you
23.
want, yeah, see, I got your question. Like, you can take the latest dependency as well, but see, the dependency that you are selecting, that should be compatible with your Java and your Maven and Spring Boot. So sometimes the dependency, if you select one dependency as the latest and some other dependency are some old version, right? So sometimes those will not be very compatible. So you can do some kind of like Google search, like with this particular dependency, let's say with Java 8, what are the Maven dependencies that are compatible? So you can do something like that, and then you will be able to uh, you must include the compatible dependencies. So for that you need to have some you can do some kind of Google search, and that will basically help you to know the compatible versions for each other. Is it fine? It's
Yeah.
not always the latest version, but you can select according to your requirements the compatible versions. Like Java 1.8, what is the compatible Maven version for that? So you can select like that.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So we will go ahead and modify some things in the pom.xml. So we have modified one thing, like we have modified the Java version here, and we will also, we have added here Spring Boot starter web, and we also need some kind of like, hello, can someone mute themselves? Yeah, okay. Yeah, just a second. Yeah, so I have modified this Java version, and I have this Spring Boot starter web dependency, which is like already imported when I added the dependency in the Spring Initializer project. Now I also need to add some kind of MySQL connector Java. So you remember then that when we built our JDBC connectivity with Java, we required some MySQL connector Java, right? That we added to our library. But here we will just add it to our pom.xml file. So let's go ahead and again search for that. MySQL connector, MySQL connector dependency. So it will take me to this Maven repository, and what I will do, I'll go ahead and I will select one. Let me select this version. So I'll go here, I'll copy this, and once I copy this, I'll go ahead and I will add it in one of the dependency sections of our pom.xml. See, within this dependencies, we have like several dependency. So I have added this MySQL connector Java dependency. So you have your uh, MySQL client that you downloaded for JDBC connectivity, right? So we will utilize connecting to MySQL database. So we'll see how we can like connect to the MySQL DB. It would be very easy. You don't have to basically write a lot of code for connecting to the database. We will specify certain things in our property file. So this is basically used to connect to our MySQL database. This MySQL connector jar is required, and we also need something. Let me add another dependency section. So here we would need Spring Boot starter JDBC. So we will use Java database connectivity. So for that, I will just write something like Spring Boot starter JDBC, and this also comes from org.spring framework, spring framework dot boot. And once you add any dependency in the section, right, you can see one uh, icon over here, right, on the top hand right corner. There's a load Maven changes. You can click on this icon. So once you click on this icon, right, your dependencies are loaded. Means whatever dependency or jars are required for your project, it will be loaded. So let me click on this. So see, these are the external libraries which are automatically added now to your project. These many libraries are automatically added to your project. What you did not go ahead and download those dependency on your own. You did not add any jar externally. You just have to mention it in this pom.xml file. So once you do this, it will be downloading the libraries and adding it to your class path. You don't have to do anything. You just have to add those dependency in the pom.xml file. And we will also require something as Lombok. There's a Lombok dependency. So Lombok dependency will be helping you with certain annotation based processing of your annotations. So this is one of the things which will help you to like make your code very brief and concise. So you remember like generating getters and setters and that those two string method, right? And writing those constructors. So now you don't have to write those. You just have to provide some annotations, and this Lombok dependency will take care of that. So let me try to like add that Lombok version. So let me add that Lombok. And this also this comes from a different group ID. This is like org.project Lombok, and see, I have already used this. That's why I know the versions and this like group ID and artifact ID. Means once you start working on these things, you will know. But you can also always do a Google search and you can go to that MVN repository and download these things. So let me again try to load these dependencies. I'll click on this icon. So I have clicked on this icon. Everyone following until now, if you have any questions, you can ask. Okay, take a minute and try to see all the dependencies that we have added as of now.
Bring the SQL dependency is the same thing, right?
Yeah, we have added that SQL dependency, right? We have added this Spring Boot starter JDBC because we will be requiring JDBC connectivity dependencies, and we need a jar as well for that, right? MySQL connector jar. So we have this MySQL connector jar as well. You remember when we performed that JDBC connectivity with Core Java, what we did? We
Yeah.
added one
Right.
MySQL connector jar, right? So here we need to include it as part of our dependency. Once you include it as part of your dependency, right, it will load those dependencies for you. All those dependencies which you have added will be loaded this side. It will be, see, I have loaded, I have added that Lombok dependency. It is available here. Then,
Yeah. My question, it
yes,
should be the same thing, when you bring this, when you bring the SQL dependency, the same version, or just you can any latest.
so this 8.0, so if you go to the Maven repository versions, right?
Yeah, you bring the
Yeah, if you go to this Maven dependency here, right, MySQL connector, jar versions, there are a lot of versions which are available. There will be like lot of versions which are available. See, 8.0.33, this is our latest version, but I've selected 8.0.11 because I've used this version. Sometimes with your project, you can select the latest, means going on the latest version is a safe option. Means you can go to the latest version. Most of the times it will work. Sometimes if there are like compatibility issues, then what you can do, you can go to a previous version as well. You can see, means sometimes when you add and try to run your application, you will get certain things in logs. If it works fine, then perfectly fine. If it does not, then it will give you some error. Then you will have to like do some kind of like search research, and then do some kind of hit and trial, like if this version is going or not, or if this version is working with that not. You can do some kind of like search, but latest versions generally will work for you.
Okay.
Yeah. How dependencies can inherit one another. So see, once you add any dependency, right, they have like some inbuilt internal dependencies automatically added. So let's say you have added Spring Boot Starter JDBC dependency. So all those dependencies within JDBC will be downloaded for you. Means there will be like some internal dependencies, some internal jars within those jars. So those will also be added to your dependencies. Those will be like downloaded to your class path. So see, I have not added lot of dependencies, right? I have added only few dependencies. Like see, in our project we have one Spring Boot starter web, which is used for building Spring web project. Then we have some Spring Boot starter test. This is used for like, this dependency will help you to basically write your test cases like JUnit test cases. Then we have one dependency. These two dependencies are basically for your data layer, like MySQL connector Java and my Spring Boot starter JDBC. And then I have added Lombok dependency. But if you see on the left hand side, right, in this external libraries, there are like lot of dependencies which are added. So some of these dependencies come as part of like internal dependency. Means once you like provide these dependencies, it will like add some 4 5 6 jars just with one dependency. So it will add many internal dependency related jars automatically with just one dependency added in your pom.xml. So that takes care of the internal dependencies. So we have added few dependencies. So this will be okay for now. As we go ahead and our uh, requirements add on, right? So we can add more dependencies. There's nothing as such. So we might require some more dependencies. We will come again to this pom.xml and we can add those dependencies. So you have understood this pom.xml, right? This is for our dependency management. Whatever dependencies you require, you can add it here. And see this build section. This has also generated a build section. So for build, we are using Spring Boot Maven plugin. So once we generated our project with that Maven option, right, it has also provided you something like Spring Boot Maven plugin. So we are using Maven for our build purpose. Maven is a build tool. Maven is also a dependency management tool.
Should we add that one or the default?
Sorry?
Is building, did you add it or just this coming for a default?
It generated, since I selected that option, right, with that Maven on our
Spring service.
Spring initializer, right? I selected this as Maven, so it provided me that with that dependency. It provided me with those dependencies, and it automatically added that. Okay, how can we add POM file using CMD? Um, TJ, I'm not sure how we can add it using a CMD. Generally, means there might be some command to add it via CMD, but I'm not sure. Generally, you can do as what you can do. You can go ahead and add some more pom.xml files from here as well. You can add some more pom.xml files from here. You can like select some file, provide some pom.xml name, you can add it here, or you can like generate it from the Spring Initializer as well. You can like always go ahead here, and you can also click on this file. You can provide the name like pom.xml, and you can like start building the pom.xml on your own as well. That is also okay. Got it? Okay, so we have few things already added, so we'll go with like building our basic blocks of our application. So let's go ahead. Okay, for now you can see this source folder, right? SRC folder. So once you expand this, there are two folders, subfolders. One is the main subfolder and one is the test folder. So all the code related things you will write in your main project in this main folder. Means this is basically used for like your development. In this main you will have this Java, and you see this package structure what you selected, right? com.myorg, and this whatever test that you saw right now, this test folder, right? This we will utilize for writing our JUnit test cases. We will see it at some later point of time. So whatever code we will write now, we will write it in the main folder. This test folder is basically used for writing unit test cases, JUnit test cases, integration test cases. So we will see this at some later point of time. So let's expand this main subfolder, and you can see this folder structure, right? You can see this folder structure like com.myorg. You have provided this in your Spring Initializer. When we were building that Spring Initializer, we were providing the details. So we provided something like com.myorg. And see, this is our employee management application. This class is basically your starting point of your application. When I talked about annotations, right, I had covered Spring Boot application annotation. So this is the most important annotation, and this basically does your auto configuration for your project. It embeds the Tomcat server for your project. It helps in basically building those beans, spring beans as well. So we have already discussed this annotation in our theory classes, and this is your main method. If you expand this main method, see Spring Boot application dot run. So this is your entry point. This class is basically your entry point of the application. Once you run this class, your Spring Boot application gets started. The Spring container comes into play. Your application context is created, and all the Spring beans what you have, all the components that you have in your project, that gets initialized. So let's try to run this project. Just right click and go on this run employee management dot main. Let's see, we will try to run this project. Okay, we have some error. Spring Boot. Okay, so we have like changed our Java version, right? So according to that, we might also have to change our Spring Boot version. So we will see that Spring version. It is giving me some error for Spring Boot version as well. So since we are using Java 8, so we have to use some other Spring Boot version. So let's go ahead. So this is the latest version, Spring Boot version 3.2.2. So since we are using some Java version, older version like 1.8, so that is why we need to basically have some older version of Spring Boot. So this was some 3 dot version. So let's try with some 2 dot version. Let me try to use this version 2.4.6 and try to load that Maven dependency. Okay, now let me go ahead and try to again run this application. Okay, see, there are a lot of things that we are getting that we need to fix. Application failed to start. Why? Because you have provided in your dependency. See, these logs you are able to see, right? So you have to read these logs why the application failed. Now we have provided the dependency for Spring Boot Starter JDBC, and we have also provided MySQL connector dependency, but we have not provided which MySQL DB I want to connect to. We have not provided the username password. We have not provided the database details. You remember when we created that JDBC connectivity, we provided those details, right? The database name, the host, the port, the username and the password. All those details we provided when we created our project, uh, that JDBC connectivity. So you always have to like read these logs. This will help you to basically fix the issues. So now what I'm seeing the issue is failed to configure a data source URL. At URL attribute is not specified and no embedded data source could be configured. So let me show you one more thing. We have one resources folder, and in this resources folder we have one application.properties folder, application.properties file. Here we will add all the property related things. Like if we want to add any property, we have to configure here and see how easy it will be to connect to your database. We have to, okay, one more thing, let's specify the port on which our server will be running. Let's say that we want our Spring Boot application to run on this port like 8080. You can modify this port as well. Means your application when it runs, you need some IP and server port to access that application, right? So let's say our server port is 8080. So you have to write something like this: server dot port equal to 8080. Now we have to like provide some properties for this connecting to our data source. So we will provide some properties like spring.gpa.hibernate.ddl auto is equal to update. So this is like one, if we want to like spring gpa hibernate, and there is some ddl command. Ddl is basically your data definition language, that is a SQL term. So what this property means is we can utilize the JPA Hibernate thing and we can use this. Oh, TJ, why we don't use HTTP dot port? That is like Spring convention here. Means when we use this server dot port, right? The Spring Boot understands that we want to change the port. So there are certain things that you have to use as it is. Like the Spring application will understand that server dot port. That means if we use this HTTP dot port, right, it won't change that port. So these are certain things that you have to use as it is. these properties you can always like Google and you will get these properties, but you will have to use this as it is. So let's add our URL. Spring data source URL means we want to connect to the database, so we will provide the database related related configuration. So we are using JDBC, right? So we will provide something like this. I think you have already seen this while we were connecting to database using Core Java. We will provide some IP. So since we have our MySQL database on our local, we will provide localhost, and then MySQL runs on 3306 port, and I have some DB created in my project. I had this test underscore DB created, which I had shown you for Core Java. I'll show you that once again. Let me open this MySQL workbench. So we had created this test DB for JDBC connectivity, right? And this has got some tables like employee table, student table, user table. There are some tables created in this. So this test underscore DB is basically our database name. So we want to connect to this database. So we have provided this as the database name. So this is the connectivity that we are using, like JDBC connectivity. And what we are using MySQL client for connecting to the database. If we were using Oracle for connecting to our database, it would be Oracle instead of this MySQL. And this is the IP of the database server. Since our database is in our local, we are using localhost. Suppose your database was available on some cloud, so you would have some different IP for that. So let's keep it as localhost since our database is in our local. And this is the port of database. This is the port of the database, and this is our database name. We would also need the username and password to connect to the database, right? Our application needs to know you have provided the URL, but your application needs to authenticate to the database server as well, right? So it will require the username and password as well. So let me try to provide the username. I had set the data source name as username as root, and let me provide the password as well. Spring.datasource.password is equal to welcome1. And I need to like load some driver as well. So when you want to like create a database connection, you remember loading some JDBC driver as well, and then establishing the connection. So there were like 4-5 steps while performing the JDBC connectivity, like loading the driver, establishing a connection. Then we were using the prepared statement to pre-compile our query, and then we were using the execute update or execute query. If you can recall those things, right? This is I am doing with the help of properties. We don't have to write any Java class for doing these things. So we need to provide the driver that we want to use. So it will be like spring.datasource.driver, and it is class name, and we need to provide the driver. Since we are using MySQL, we will provide the driver which is required for MySQL. So it will be like com.mysql dot cj dot jdbc dot driver. So these are the properties that I have added. So this application properties, whatever property you add right in application.properties, this will be taken by your application. Let's try to see if our issue is fixed. It was searching for some data source URL and it did not find. Let me see if now that I have added these things, let me see if our application is able to resolve this error. Everyone is able to follow these things, right? If you have any questions, you can always ask me. Let me try to rerun this application. Okay. Port 8080 was already in use. So let's go ahead and modify this port. Let's rename it as 9090. Let's run this application on a different port. Okay, perfect. Our application has started. See these logs? Started employee management application in 1.04 seconds. So our application is started. So this is the simplest thing that we have done. What we have done until now, we have done three things. We have generated our Spring Boot project, we have imported the project, then we have added few dependencies in our pom.xml, and this class employee management application.java. This was like auto generated by the Spring Boot initializer project. So this is basically the starting point of your application. It has @Spring Boot application annotation, and this basically helps to bootstrap your application. Means this will help you in creating an application context. It will help in basically injecting all the uh, components. It will help in initializing the Spring Beans, and it will also add that Tomcat server to your project. So these are the things which this particular class will do. This @Spring Boot application is a very important annotation. And in the application.properties, I added few properties, like I have configured the server port, and I have configured certain database related properties. I have added the data source URL, username, password, the driver to be loaded. So these are the few things that I have added. So anyone has any questions until now, or we will proceed. So we were able to start our application. Means our Spring Boot application was started, but we do not have any code written in this as of now. We will try to like create our project now. So uh, uh, we have like discussed few things, right? That our project would basically contain three layers. When I was like taking the theory classes, I talked about like presentation layer, service layer, and the data layer. So presentation layer was basically handled by the controller classes, and your business logic was handled by the service classes, and your data layer was handled by the repository layer. So we will try to create those building blocks here now. So we'll create three packages. Let me go in this com.my.org and try to create a new package. So I'll create a controller package where we will write all the REST API specifications. Means whatever REST API that we will be building, we will be providing those definitions in this controller layer, that is our presentation layer. Then we would create one package for writing our business logic, and that package will be basically your, let's name this a service package. So you can always follow this convention, like controller for handling your presentation layer, service for writing your business logic. If you follow this right, so anyone who reads your code already understands that this is the place that you have written your business logic, and this is the place you have added your presentation layer things. So these are some standard convention, naming convention. You can always give a name of your own, but these are standard conventions for naming the packages. So let's name this as DAO. DAO is basically your data access layer. So here you will be writing all the database queries and all those things for communicating with the database. Yeah, TJ, these are the naming conventions for the layers. Like this is your controller for the presentation layer, service for the business logic layer, and DAO for your data layer. This is your data access objects. So you will write, you can always follow this convention like controller, service, and DAO. So these are like standard conventions which I am telling you. So you can try to always follow this. You can like use this in any of those projects. So let me try to create some classes now. And we will also need some data access, some DTO objects. Means we would require some model objects. Like suppose we need some object to pass in our request, right? In our payload we want to pass some objects, and we want some objects to be some Java objects that we need as part of our response. So we would need some Java objects for that, right? So we will create another package. So we need to create data transfer objects. So DTO is basically data transfer objects. So let's say we are creating one employee object, and that employee object needs to be passed as a request. So we would create that particular object, that particular class in this DTO. DTO is basically data transfer object. We would require the objects for passing the HTTP request, and we would also require uh, uh, this data transfer objects for receiving our response. So we would need one package for this as well. So I've created some basic blocks for now. So we would see if we need certain things, we would go ahead and try to create those as well. So let's go to our database for now. Let's open our MySQL workbench, and what I need to do is I'll drop this. I will recreate this employee table. So for anyone who has not seen how I did those things, so let me first I'll like delete this, drop employee table, drop, okay, employee, drop table employee. So let me try to run this. So our employee table is deleted. Now I will create a fresh employee table. Okay. So we will provide some. So we will provide some fields in this employee table. So for employee, we would need one employee ID, and we will specify this ID cannot be null. If you enter any record in this particular employee table, you always need to like provide the ID. This ID cannot be null, and you are also providing the name. Let's say there is another field like name, and let's say that we have, for simplicity we are just creating uh, two fields for now. Let's keep this simple, and as we go on we will like modify the table structures. That is fine. For simplicity, what I will do is let's just keep like ID, let's keep this name, and we can keep age as well. So let's keep one field like age, and this will be like integer as well. So let me try to create this table structure. Okay, let me also try to have one file for basically adding the queries, means query. I'll name this as query.sql. So whatever query I'm basically using, I'll write it here as well, so that you are able to like later see these things as well. So this is our create table employee, and we have three fields, like one employee ID, employee name, and employee's age. So let me try to like create this table. I'll run this. Let me try to run this. So our table creation was successful. See this below logs. See, if it is green, right? Create table employee. If it is green, then that means the table was created. And if it is like red, that means there was some kind of error. Now let's go ahead and do a select star from this table. Let's do a select star from employee. We don't have any records in this table as of now, right? So you'll see the field names, but you won't see anything other. See, we are getting ID, name, and age, but you don't have any values in this table. So that is why this is empty. So we'll insert any employee record. We will insert it with our application. What we want to do is our application to insert that particular record, employee record, in our database. So let's say we want to basically add an employee to an organization. Let's have some requirement, like we want to add one employee to our organization. Everyone following me? Are you with me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So we basically have a requirement that we want to add an employee to our organization. So what we'll do, we'll first go to the controller layer, and then we'll create one Java class. Let's name it as employee controller. Okay. Now, if you remember, when I was taking the theory classes, I talked to you about an annotation, and that annotation was basically at the rate rest controller. So we would use this annotation in our controller layer. We would use at the rate rest controller to specify that this class is basically a presentation layer class, or this class is basically our controller class. Now let's go ahead and try to provide some base path for this. Means all the APIs will have some common path. All the APIs will have some common URL. You don't have to specify that common URL at each method. Means after that common URL only, whatever you specify in your methods, that will be appended. So let's add one base path. So this can be added with a request mapping annotation. Here we path, here we provide the path of the base URL. So let's provide something like /API /v1. See, you can have this like base path as like /API/v1. v1 is for version. Let's say why we specify this version in our URLs. Let's say you have some API which is working for you today, and at some later point of time, let's say after 2 years, your company decided that you want to build similar API but a new version of that API, and you can keep both the versions of the APIs in your project, and whenever required you can like point to which any version. So that is why we definitely should specify the versions. Let's say this is the first time that we are developing our employee controller, and this is our version 1. So that's why we have like mentioned it as version 1. Now let's say after a year I want to like modify this employee controller, but I also want to keep the pre-existing employee controller. So what I can do, I can like create a new controller, and all those APIs can have something like API slash v2. That is a new version. So that is why versioning is required. Now let's say I want to create an employee record. Our goal is basically to create an employee record. Create an employee record in the organization. So what we would do, see, this is like creating something, right? This is like creating something. And when we want to like create any new resource, we knew that we have to use post REST API, right? Post mapping of the REST API. If we want to like create any new resource, we have to go for post REST API. If you want to fetch anything, we use the get REST API. And if you want to delete anything, we go for a delete REST API. If you want to modify anything, we have to go for a put REST API. So these are some REST APIs that we have discussed in theory, and these are very common. So we want to basically create an employee now in the create an employee record in the organization. So what we will do, this is like creating a new resource. So we would go with the post mapping @ post mapping, and let's say we have to pass some kind of URL path. So what we would do is, let's say our URL would look something like save/employee, or let's say save doesn't look good, we will use something like register employee. And after this we have to provide something like, see, we would be using JSON for our application building. So, and this API would consume some payload, right? It requires some payload that we want to send along with our REST APIs. So there is something which we have to provide here. After this URL, right? This URL is basically specific for registering your employee. So in this value you will be passing this particular /register/employee. Now what we want to do, we want to like pass, like what we would be passing as the payload. Are we like passing JSON, are we like passing XML, or are we passing HTML format? So we have to pass JSON. So there is something that you need to write here: consumes media type dot application JSON value. So once you write this, then this API will basically understand that whatever request that you are passing, that has to be in the JSON format. Now let's write down our method, controller level method. So public is the modifier here, and the response that we will be returning, we would return in a response entity object. So response entity object is basically used for returning the responses, and we can name our method as register employee. So our method would be requiring some kind of payload, right? So our method would be requiring some kind of payload. So when we want to pass some payload, some data transfer object along with our payload, then we need to use some kind of annotation like request body. We have discussed this request body annotation. This will be used for passing some DTO object. Now let's say we have some employee object that we want to pass along with this. Means we are registering an employee, so I would need some employee related information. So let's say we want to keep those information in an employee object. Okay, now our employee object itself does not exist, right? So we have not created our employee object. That is why we started getting some error. So this is a data transfer object which we have to send as part of our payload. But this is not existing as of now. So let's go ahead and try to create our employee class here. In this DTO, now the employee in the database had actually three fields, right? We had the ID, we had the name, and we had the age. So let's say the ID would be an integer, private int ID. Now let's say name would be a string, and age would again be, let's say, an integer. You remember generating the getters and setters, right? Everyone remembers the generating getters and setters, right? Like if I click on this and generate the getters and setters, it generates this kind of methods for me, right? This editor would generate the getters and setters for our purpose. Now what I want to do, I have removed these getters and setters. Now what I want to do is I would use some kind of Lombok annotation. We I would use some kind of annotation for this purpose. I don't want to write all those code for getters and setters. So we have something like @getter annotation. So once you pass this @getter annotation, right, it will automatically means your getter methods are already available now. And you can also use your setter methods. See, setter is coming from two dependencies. One is Lombok dependency and one is like JDK NASCON. You have to select the Lombok one. And let's say I want to create two constructors for this as well. There is one way that you can go ahead and generate those constructors with this, generate the constructor using this option, or you can simply use one annotation. Like if you want to create a default constructor that is with no parameters, you can create with @no args constructor. And again, if you want to create a parameterized constructor, you can use an all args constructor. So what is the problem that is saying? Okay, this is the import statement. So we need to import this class here. Okay, see, now we have created a class employee with the three fields like ID, name, and age, and we have created the getters and setters, and we have created two constructors. One is the default constructor and one is the parameterized constructor. You don't have to write all the code here in this particular class. You just have to basically provide these annotations. And remember, we used to like create one toString, right, where that toString was basically used for representing your string. So you can also create that with the help of these annotations. See, your code has become cleaner now, right? You are not using anything, all those things means this class would have become very big class if we were writing all the getter setter methods and the code for writing the constructors, generating the toString. But this can all be done with the help of annotations. Yeah, so, yeah, TJ, this is like very clean and short. So that is why like the Spring Boot application is like, that is why like Spring Boot is very easy and like it is like very clean. It helps you to write clean code. You don't have to write a lot of code for generating things. See, we were able to like manage the database connections with just this properties. And in this employee DTO object, I'm able to generate these getters, setters, and these constructors using just this annotation. So that is why this is like very precise, this is very brief, and this looks very clean as well. So let's again go to our controller class. Okay. So now what we would do basically is we would return the response entity if everything goes fine. But before that, what I need to do, I need to have, see, I have our request payload here. Now our request payload must be passed to the service layer, and then that data should be passed to the data layer, and from the data layer I will communicate with the database and save this employee record in the database. Correct? I am getting some payload from the client in the presentation layer, and from here I want to pass that particular information to the service layer where our business logic is written. If we want to do some alteration or modification to that particular information, that has to be done in the service layer where we write the entire business logic. And since we want this employee record to be created, we want to definitely save it in our database, right? We want to persist in our database. So for that purpose, that information needs to go to the data layer, and in the data layer we would write queries where we want to save this particular information to our database in that particular table. So let's see how we will do this. So for that I need some employee service class, right? I need some particular employee service class. So what we will do, we will go in the service class and I'll create one employee service. So always when we write a service class or a data layer class, we would create one interface, and that interface, in interface we will provide the methods which we want to implement, and there will be some implementation class. There will be some implementation class. For that we will have some other folder structure as well. Let's see how we will perform that. So in this employee service, in this service module, basically I will create one Java interface. Let's name this as employee service. Okay, I did not want to have this class. Let me delete this. I wanted to have it as an interface. So let me try to create this Java class. I will click on this interface. See, I have three, four options, right? I can create a class, I can create an interface. So now I will be creating one interface. And you know, in interface we just provide the definitions. We don't provide the implementation, right? So what I will do, I want to save the employee record here. So what I'll do is basically void save employee details, or let me just write it, void register employee, and this would require one employee object. And we are not providing the definition, we would provide a colon semicolon, means we are just providing the prototype that we want to create. Now let some class implement these methods, right? So we will create one Java class. Okay, before that we will create some folder structure here. So our interface is here, and there will be some package. There would be IMPL. So see, when you see this path, right, com.myorg.service.impl, when you see this IMPL, you basically can understand this IMPL basically contains the implementation classes for this service. So let me try to go ahead and try to create one implementation class. We would name this as IMPL at the end. Whatever interface name you have, you can prefix that with IMPL. So these are like standard naming conventions. If you start using this, right, you will get into the practice. So this is our implementation class. Now this method, this interface, whatever methods that we define here must be implemented by this class. See, now your entire core Java knowledge will come into play. Whatever you have studied in core Java, it was not waste. You will start using one by one. So we will use this implements keyword, and then I would use this employee service interface here. So now that you are implementing this interface employee service, and this has a abstract method, this abstract method must be implemented by the class that is implementing this interface. That is why you are getting this error as well. See, read this error. Class employee service IMPL must either be declared abstract or implement abstract methods. So we would go ahead and implement those methods. Let me click on this implement method. So when I click on this implement method, this editor will generate the structure of that method for me. It would generate the structure of that particular method. Now let me go ahead and try to write some definition. Let me try to provide some definition here. But before that, if I want to register any employee, I would need to communicate with the database object as well, and our employee service needs to communicate with the database object as well. Now we do not have any database classes or objects created as of now, right? So how would I do that? For that, I would have to write some code in our data access layer. So let's go ahead and try to create a class in our DTO, in our data layer. So again, we would create one new interface. So let's name this as employee DAO. So these are special naming conventions. You can name, you can prefix this with DAO, employee DAO. If anyone sees this kind of naming convention, they would know that this is related to your data access layer. So let me try to create this interface, and in this interface basically I would create that method here. Like I would create the method to save employee details, and this would again require the employee object, sorry, it would be employee object, and this is our interface. Now again I would create one package for implementing this interface. So our employee DAO interface must be implemented by some class, right? So I'll have that particular implementation class in this particular package. Let's again prefix this with IMPL. See, all the naming conventions would look similar to you now. See, we had our employee service interface. Its implementation class was prefixed with IMPL. Similarly, we have our data access interface with employee DAO, and it is prefixed with employee DAO IMPL. Now let's write some code in this employee DAO IMPL. So this is our repository layer. So once this is our repository layer, we can like make this as a component, or we can like name it as a repository. Let's name this as repository. We can also alternatively use this as @component. So once we name it as @repository or @component, you know that this is a Spring Bean or a Spring component. So let's remove @component. Let's keep this @repository here. So this class needs to implement the interface. It will implement this employee DAO interface. So let me go ahead and try to implement the methods. So we want to uh, write some particular code in this save employee details. Just give me a second. Okay, we'll write some particular code to communicate to the database here. So we would require some kind of query. We would require some kind of query to communicate to the database. So let's write our query. So we want to insert something to our database, right? We want to insert certain details to our database. So let's write our query. We need to insert. So insert query looks like something like this. Insert into employee. Employee is our table name, and what fields that we want to insert our values in. It would be ID and comma name and comma age. Our table employee table has three fields, right? ID, name and age, and we have to pass some values to that. So we would pass some values. So if you remember, we can pass some values like this. Like I can pass something like 1 comma I can pass some hard-coded values here, right? Like this. Let's say this is our query. We have all the values here, like insert into employees. This is values 1 comma John comma 18. So 1 is basically the ID, name is basically John, and age is 18. But do we want to like do it this way? We don't want to do it this way, right? We want to actually pass dynamic values from our application. We don't want to hard code any values, right? So we can like pass some kind of placeholders in Spring Boot. So Spring Boot allows us to pass some placeholders, and we would pass values at the runtime. So those placeholders are basically question mark comma question mark comma question mark. So see, since we have three fields, we need to like pass information to three fields, right? So that is why we are having three question marks separated by commas. So these are like placeholders. The first placeholder, first question mark, is basically for ID, the second is for name, and the third is for the age. So now what I'll do is, okay, I have my query ready, but how do I still communicate to the database? So for that purpose, I need some kind of like JDBC connectivity, something, right? So for we have like already provided the configurations in the property file, but I will need some kind of like a database connectivity. So to communicate to your MySQL client, you would require some JDBC template. So let's keep this JDBC template here. And what you would need is, you would need to now again another knowledge of your Spring Boot will come into play. You remember we talked about auto wiring, right? You remember there were like three types of auto wiring. One was like auto wiring by property, then auto wiring by setter methods, and auto wiring using constructors. So we would use our auto wiring using setter methods. So let's write down one setter method like public void set JDBC template. And what we want to basically set here, we want to basically set our JDBC template. And when we write this, we write something like this: JDBC template equal to JDBC template. So what this means is, and we have to use our @auto wired annotation above this. So we have written our auto wired. So this is basically like setter method injection. This we have studied in theory. Now this is the practical implementation. You have your setter method where you are initializing your data member. So this.jdbc template basically refers to this JDBC template at line number 12, and this JDBC template is coming from this parameter, and you are auto wiring this. If you auto wire a setter method, this is basically like a setter method injection. So Spring will now take care of like auto wiring this JDBC template object. You don't have to create a JDBC template with that new keyword, new JDBC template and all. So you can do this way. And now what you can do, you can return a JDBC template, public JDBC template, get JDBC template, and we can return our JDBC template. This is our getter method. Okay, now we have our JDBC template. This helps in basically, okay, one second. JDBC template. Helps in writing database queries. Yeah, TJ, this JDBC template is inbuilt. This is like Spring inbuilt classes. Like you can see this is coming from Spring Framework JDBC core.jdbc template. So your Spring Framework has this JDBC template built in. So this will help you to write the database queries. So this comes from Spring Framework dependency. You don't have to like create your own JDBC template classes. Once you just auto wire these things, means just use this and use the injection policy, like the auto wiring. You can like auto wire this by setter injection or by constructor injection. This will be auto wired, and this JDBC, all the methods which are there in JDBC will be available to you. So if I go to this class, right, if you want to like go to that class JDBC template, see, if I go to this JDBC template, this is the Java docs, like the Java documentation. See, a lot of methods are there in this JDBC. We would utilize some of those methods. there are like lot of methods in this JDBC template for querying and like writing queries. If you read this documentation, you can always take some free time and read this documentation. So this JDBC template is a built-in class. Now we would utilize this JDBC template to query to our database. See, now we would use JDBC dot. There is one thing, when we want to insert anything, we want to use this update query. JDBC like does it this way. You have to basically pass your update method here. So what do we want to like pass it here? We want to basically pass the query that we have written, and in this we have to basically pass all the all the parameters. Now we want to pass three placeholders here. So we would pass employee dot get id, employee dot get name, and employee dot get age. You have these things, id, name and age, coming from this employee object, right? See, when we created that employee object, we had just given some few annotations, getters, setters and all, right? Now you are utilizing it here. You did not write any getter methods, but you are still able to get that id, right? Employee dot get id, employee dot get name. See the power of this annotations. With just this @getter, you are able to get those fields: employee.getId, employee.getName and employee.getAge. Now you have basically written the code which is required for your data layer. Now you need, see, this data layer will provide some information. Now what you want to do is your service IMPL, right? Whatever response that you do, that has to be returned to the service layer, and that information will be returned to your presentation layer. So we'll go back to our service class, because from our service class we are calling this data layer, right? Your presentation layer is calling your service layer, and your service layer is calling your uh, database access layer. So we would write some code in this employee service IMPL. Now we want to access our data layer. How would we do that? Let's use our database access object here. We would use our employee DAO here for accessing all the methods which are in our data access layer. See, I am always using interface name here. I could have used this employee DAO IMPL as well, but we can always use the interface to uh, auto wire these things. Now what I will do is, I will again, let's use constructor injection here. Let's use constructor injection. So for using constructor injection, what we would do, we would create one constructor here of employee service IMPL, and here we would pass our database class reference that we want to inject. See, here we want to inject our data access layer, right? So that is why what I would do, this dot employee DAO equal to employee DAO, and above this constructor, what we need to do, we need to basically auto wire this thing. So now all the methods of your data layer are available in this service layer. So what we would do is, we would call that method which we had just written here in the data layer in the service layer. So we can do it with this employee DAO dot save employee details, and then we pass the employee. See, now what we need to do finally is, we go to our presentation layer, and in the presentation layer you need to call your service layer. In the presentation layer you want to basically call your service layer. So how you would do this is basically you will have to again auto wire this. You will have to first call your service layer here. So let's create a field like employee service, and let's use the property level injection this time. Let's use our property level injection this time. So I would just write here the examples of property level dependency injection. See, I've shown you all the examples. This is a property level dependency injection, and here we are using constructor level dependency injection. And in the DAO layer, what we did was setter method, setter level dependency injection. So we'll see all the usage. Now that we have everything in place, let's call this employee service dot save employee details. We will call the method, okay, it was register employee, and we need to pass the parameter employee object. So we have passed the employee object here, and if everything goes well, what we want to do is we have to pass a response entity. So we would use something like return new response entity. And if you remember the status codes, what we talked, when we create any new resource, what status code we would basically use? We would use a status code of created, http status code dot created. So I think we have everything in place. Yeah, 201, that is correct, TJ. Our status code for that would be 201, and that status code is created. So we have everything in place. See, we have our method for the presentation layer for register employee, and we have this URL, and we are passing the employee object in the as part of the request body. So we need to now call our business layer, and our business layer is basically in the service layer. So whatever code that we have written is in the service layer. So we are auto wiring this employee service such that we can like use all the methods of the employee service class. So in employee service class we have this method like for register employee, and we need to communicate to the data layer. So we have auto wired this employee DAO here, and we are calling the method in the data access layer. So employee DAO MPL, and we have written the code to communicate with the database here. Our JDBC template is basically helping us to communicate to the database, and we have the query written, and we are inserting that particular details in our database. So let's go ahead and try to run this application. Okay, there is some issue here. Field employee service required a bean of employee service that cannot be found. Okay, see, read this error. We have some issue with our service layer. Field employee service in org my controller dot employee controller required a bean of service that could not be found. What it means, that the controller layer is looking for a employee service component, but that employee service component cannot be found. Let's see our employee service IMPL. Let's see if we have some issue with that. Okay, I think we have some issue with that. See, when I created our controller, we annotated it with @REST controller, such that we understand that this is a component. This is our REST controller. When we created our data layer, we created a annotation like @repository. Now we know that this is a Spring component or a Spring Bean, but we forgot to annotate this service layer. We forgot to annotate this service layer, right? So we would go ahead and use this annotation @service here. See, you get to learn a lot from the logs. You have to get into the habit of reading the logs. If you don't understand these logs on your own, what you can do, you can always copy these logs, means something of that type, and try to Google that out. So reading the logs is very important. So let's try to again run this application. See, this time we were able to run our application. Now that our application is run, let's go ahead and try to hit that particular request from our postman. See, we have created a post request for creating a new resource. So we have to select this post method. When you click on this, we want to create a request, right? So you have got a lot of options here: get, post, put, patch, delete, and all. So we would go ahead and try to create a post request. And now we would have to use http colon localhost, since our application is running in my local. So I would have to use localhost, and I will have to use port 9090, since 9090 is the port that our application is running on. And in the controller layer, you basically can see the base path, right? So this is the base path, API/v1. So this would go with all the requests that we create in this controller. So our base path would come from here, API/v1, API/v1. And what is the post mapping? We have this URL, right? At the /register/employee. So let's go ahead and try to give this /register/employee, and in the body, since we are using JSON, we have to click on this body and pay and pass the employee object as well. We have to pass the employee object as a JSON here. So we would go in the body, click on this raw, and once we click on this raw, we have got a lot of options. We can pass text, JavaScript, JSON, HTML, or XML, but we want to use JSON. So we would use JSON. So we would pass this JSON here. And see, our employee object has 3 fields. So we have to pass 3 fields in the form of JSON: ID, name, and age. So let's pass those things in the form of JSON, and JSON are basically key value pairs. So for ID is basically integer type, so we don't have to use anything for the value. Now name is again a string. So name is a string, so we have to pass it in the form of a string. See, all these things will be key value pairs separated by commas, and we have also key. So whatever keys you create, keys will always be in string, and values can be in string or number depending on the data type. So if it is like integer, we don't have to pass it in string. If it is like string, we have to pass it in string. And other field was age. So let's pass the age. So let's pass this value. Our application is up. Let's try to hit this API. Okay, we got some error. Let's see what the error is. Driver com.mysql.jdbc driver claims to not accept JDBC URL JDBC MySQL localhost. Okay, we've got some issue. Okay, test underscore db MySQL. Driver com.mysql.cj.jdbc to driver claims to not. Okay, let me see this application dot properties. If we have some issue in this, okay, JDBC colon MySQL. Okay, I think I missed a colon over here. JDBC colon MySQL colon slash slash localhost colon 3306 slash the DB name. I think I missed a colon here. Let me try to rerun this application. Okay, our application again did start up. Let me try to hit the. Okay, so we have a status code of 201. So 201 means that our resource was created. So we are able to create this particular record in the database and persist in the database. Now let's go to our MySQL workbench and let's try to verify this. So last time when we did this select star from employee, we did not have any data. Now this time we have inserted one record with ID is equal to 1, name John and age 25. So if I run this SQL query again, I should see this particular data in the database. Let's try to run this. See, you have seen this record. Now see, we are able to see this record in the database, right? 1, ID is 1, name is John, age is 25. Now let's try to hit another API. Let's try to insert one more record. ID is 2. Let's say this, the name is Andrew, and let's say the age is 28. Let's try to again hit this particular API. Again we got a status code of 201. That means the record is created. Let's again verify this from the SQL workbench. Let's try to hit this. So we have two records now, right? We have two records. So we were able to successfully create users and insert those details in the database. Tomorrow we would write APIs. Today we have like verified that the records inserted by running this particular SQL query. Tomorrow we would write API to fetch this detail as well. So we would write get API to get these details from the database. We would write an API to get that detail as well. So for now, today we'll keep it until here. So let me know if you understood the entire flow, because this is important. If you want to know if you have like confusion in anything, you can ask your queries, because all those APIs will be built on top of this. Means if you have like understood one or two APIs, it would be easy for you to go ahead and write your own APIs. So today we had created one API for creating an employee record in the organization. So we were able to successfully register a new employee in the organization with few details. Like we just had some personal details which were inserted into the database. So if anyone has any questions, you can ask, or we'll wrap the session for today.
Thank you. Very interesting this one, but a little bit faster.
Okay. If you have any queries, you can ask me. Can you please review Spring MVC with the layers for highlight? Okay. See, we have like three layers. One is the presentation layer, and one is the service layer, and one is the data access layer. So what happens? Let's try to recall our architecture. How the Spring MVC works. Basically, you have a client and the client is basically sending you a request. So once that request is sent to you, that request basically comes to your presentation layer, and presentation layer is basically this controller. This controller class is basically your presentation layer. So you have your request coming from the client, and that request is basically coming in the form of this URL. See, the client is basically hitting a URL, right? And that URL is basically /API v1 /register /employee. So the base path URL, any methods that we will further create in this class, we will have to use this base URL. Means this URL is common to all the APIs, and for each particular URL, we are basically using a separate URL like /register /employee. So since the client wants to create a new resource in the a new resource in the database, so what we are using, we are using a post mapping. And since we are using JSON for our purpose, what we need to do is use consumes equal to media type dot application JSON value, and our presentation layer needs to like call the service layer, and the service layer further needs to communicate to the data layer, and the data layer communicates with the database, where we further write queries and insert some data in the database. So see, we have injected the dependency for presentation layer. Since presentation layer calls the service layer, we need to have the service layer injected into our employee controller. So we have used property level dependency injection here. This is our interface of service layer, right? Employee service. And we have auto wired this. So once we auto wire this, all the methods of this particular service are available to this controller layer. Now let's go to this service layer. We have our service layer where we have annotated this class as @service. Now by this we mean that this is the place where we write the entire business logic. This is the place that we write our entire business logic, and this is the method for registering the employee. But now we need to communicate with the data layer. We need to communicate with the data layer, and for that we need our data layer object. So this is the interface for accessing all the methods in the data layer. So we have to auto wire this employee DAO, and for that what we will be using, we need to again inject this particular dependency in our service layer. So we are using our service layer. What we are doing, we are using a constructor level dependency injection. So we have created our constructor, and we are using this auto wired annotation on top of that. That means we are using constructor level dependency injection. And what we need to inject, we need to inject the data layer object. So we need to inject employee DAO object, and here we are basically initializing this data member. This is what we do in our constructors, right? Remember, when we started learning core Java as well, means all the data members were initialized in a parameterized constructor in this manner. So this dot employee DAO equal to employee DAO. Now what I want to do, I want to use this method. I want to use this data layer object to call our method in the data access layer. So let's go to the data access layer where we have, if you click on this, it will take you there. So it will take you to the interface, and if you click on this one implementation, right, it will take you to the implementation class. Just click on this. So it took you to the data access layer. So here we want to basically communicate with the database. So we need JDBC template. This JDBC template is an inbuilt Spring Boot class which basically helps you to write queries, to insert data, fetch data. There are a lot of methods in this JDBC template. So what we would do, we have written our query, and this is our insert query, insert into table name, and these are the three values that we want to insert, and these are placeholders because we want to provide dynamic values at runtime by the clients. And in this JDBC template, jdbc.template.update, we have to pass the query, and along with the query I need to pass the ID, name and age. That is why I have passed employee.getID, employee.getName and employee.getAge. So once all these operations are done, I started my server, and once I started the server, I went ahead to my Postman. This is for our testing purpose, where I have like pasted the entire URL. So this is our URL. API/v1 is coming from our base URL, and this URL is basically coming from the method, particular method. And I have to pass three things: ID, name and age. And ID is of integer type, name is of string type, and age is of integer type again. And that's why I'm able to pass this. Once I hit this request, I was able to save this employee's record in the database. And if you go to this MySQL workbench and do a select star from employee, you will get the details. Yeah, TJ, we can call this employee management application as a microservice. We can definitely call this as a microservice. Yeah, I think it's been a long class, but it was important because I did not want to leave this API in the middle, so that like you can understand at least one API. So I'll conclude this call today here itself, and tomorrow we'll have the class at the same time. Try to, I will upload this video as well, and try to like practice this whenever you have time, so that will like help you. Yeah, thank you everyone.